Manchester City have just spent £65 million on Antoine Semenyo, and that's a lot of money, especially when we already have so many other options of players that can play on the wing. So why are we making this transfer? Well, I think there's three main reasons why we're doing this, and I'm going to break down each one for you. Firstly, I'm going to explain what makes Semenyo unique in possession, and then I'm going to tell you the multiple different roles he could play in this City team. And finally, and most importantly, I'm going to tell you how he's going to improve Manchester City's press and out of possession play. So, why is Semenyo so unique in possession? I think his profile is like a mixture of Doku and Marmoush, and like Doku, Semenyo is an elite dribbler. He's so effective 1v1, and that's mainly because he's so two-footed. That is something that's really, really important, and something I'm going to mention all throughout this video. However, unlike Doku, despite being an amazing dribbler, he isn't dribbling all the time. He's not really doing it that often. He's only averaging 3.62 successful take-ons per 90, which only puts him in the top 56% for that statistic. For some comparison, Doku is in the top 1% and he averages 10.72 dribbles per 90. That is obviously way higher. However, I think a big reason for this is because Doku is playing for Manchester City and therefore he's getting way more opportunities to dribble than Semenyo, who is playing for Bournemouth, because Semenyo is a similar level dribbler to Doku, obviously not quite as good, but he has that raw pace, that raw acceleration from a starting still position that makes him so effective. This goal Semenyo scored against Fulham is such an amazing example of his dribbling. I think it showcases everything he does amazingly. Initially, Semenyo's driving down the wing. Castaño's come across to try and shut him down, and Semenyo knows that if he continues to drive down the wing, Castaño will put in a tackle and he'll lose the ball. So Semenyo slows down. He decelerates, something you maybe wouldn't think is effective in this situation, and this makes the situation a 2v1 against Semenyo as well. Seemingly, this is a really bad decision by Semenyo, but remember, Semenyo is so two-footed, and this is so important here because it makes him unpredictable. The defenders don't know which way he's going to go, and therefore their body position has to be squared for Semenyo, which allows Semenyo to manipulate that body weight and manipulate that body position, which he does. He drops his shoulder, signifying that he's going to cut inside, which means Castaño shifts his body weight left. This allows Semenyo to take advantage of that and instead go down the touchline and use his pace and power we talked about earlier to go past Castaño, and he goes on to score a fantastic goal. Which brings me on to another huge strength Semenyo has, which is his ball striking. He's a goal-scoring winger, and that is something we don't really have at Manchester City at the moment, with Doku and Semenyo both being quite poor in front of goal. They're not really clinical finishers. However, Semenyo is not that at all. This guy has scored 9 goals so far in the Premier League, making him one of the top scorers in the entire league, but he's also averaging 1.16 shots on target per game, putting him in the top 85% for this statistic, which is amazing. And if we look at his shot map as well, you can just see that his shots are coming from all over in and around the box. It's not like they're clustered around one area, which is fantastic because it makes Semenyo so unpredictable. He's so two-footed, again coming back to that. In fact, of his 45 shots with his feet, 23 have been with his left foot and 22 with his right foot, showing just how versatile this guy is. However, Semenyo does have some issues and negative points to his game as well, which mainly come in his passing and creativity. When you watch this guy, often he can be a bit clunky at times on the ball. He's not the best in tight spaces. He's not the most efficient with the ball. He's only got a 71.8 pass completion rate this season, which means he's in the bottom 28% for that statistic, which is not good at all, especially when he's going to be playing in a Manchester City team that is so possession dominant, is so ball dominant. He's going to have to be getting on the ball in build-up, in tight spaces all the time, which at the moment he just doesn't really do at Bournemouth. In fact, he's in the bottom 25% of passes for the Premier League in the last year. So clearly, he's not that comfortable on the ball, and that makes me worry if he'll be able to translate across to a Pep Guardiola system where we'll have to be on the ball all the time. And his creative numbers are similar dismal reading. He's in the bottom 11% of players in the last season for expected assists, with only 0.1 per 90, which is really poor. And similarly, the bottom 28 for key passes, again, really poor. And I think it could be a bit of a problem, because I think it means that Semenyo can't play in this City team if Cherki is not playing as well, because you need that high volume creator like Ryan Cherki to supplement Semenyo's lack of creativity in this team. However, despite that, I think Semenyo is still a really valuable profile for this Man City team. And a large reason for this is because of how tactically flexible Semenyo is. At Bournemouth, we've seen him being used as both a left winger and a right winger, and he's been equally effective from both sides because of that natural two-footedness we talked about earlier. He can play on both sides and be really comfortable at both, which makes him a great squad player because, like I mentioned, he can cover both positions. Here's a great example of him starting on that left side, cutting in and using his right foot to bend the ball into that far right corner. And now we can see him doing the exact same thing, this time starting on the right side, cutting in onto his left foot and using his left foot to bend into the far left corner, showing how two-footed he is again and how effective he is on both sides of the pitch. But Semenyo has also played another position at times for Bournemouth. He's played in that number 9, in that striker role. So does this mean we could see Semenyo cover the striker and play there for Manchester City when Haaland needs a rest? I think it's definitely a possibility. However, Omar Marmoush is another player that can play the striker role, and when he's played as a solo striker for Man City, he's really struggled and been largely ineffective. And I think this because Marmoush isn't physical enough. He's nowhere near as physical as Haaland, and so much about Haaland's game, and therefore Man City's game, because the system is built around Haaland, is about pinning centre-backs. It's about running in behind, and Marmoush can't really do this to anywhere near the same level as Haaland. And I think Semenyo is way more physical than Marmoush. He's more explosive, he's as fast, he's stronger, he can pin centre-backs better, and therefore I think it is a real possibility that we see him play as this striker instead of Haaland maybe in the smaller game. But I think what we're more likely to see is something a bit like this, with Semenyo playing as that second striker, moving off Haaland, playing up front with Haaland. And we've seen this previously last season, the main example being in Newcastle at home, where we played this 4-4-2 kind of setup with Omar Marmoush playing as that second striker behind Haaland, and it worked fantastically. We won the game 4-0 and Marmoush scored a hat-trick, showing how effective this position can be. And I think we could see Semenyo play a similar position behind Haaland like Marmoush did in this game. But that is not the reason why Manchester City want to sign Antoine Semenyo. In fact, nothing we've talked about so far is the real reason City want Antoine Semenyo. The real reason is his out of possession work, how great he is off the ball, because Manchester City's press is so poor at the moment, and we really need an out of possession beast to come and bolster that. And I think Semenyo is that guy. If we look at his FBref defensive statistics, we can see just how good he is off the ball, how strong he is in duels, how athletic this guy is to go and cover ground to make it to the players and win the ball back. He's fantastic defensively, and I think this is why we want him. But why is Manchester City's press so poor at the moment? For me, I think it's mainly about poor platforming and poor player profiling in the press at the moment, because if you look at our press, it's in this kind of diamond formation, and it's kind of split into 3 separate sections if you want to think about it that way. You kind of have the defensive section, which is the back 4 plus Rodri, who are very passive. They're rarely going to step up. Yes, Rodri and the fullback step up occasionally, but for the most part, they're passive, not really getting involved. And then you have these 2 midfielders who have to cover all of the central space in the pitch, and then you have the 3 up front who are going to lead the press from the front and press super aggressively. And what you might have noticed is this press isn't that risky. We're not committing that many players forwards. We only have a front 3, and therefore this front 3 is normally outnumbered 4v3 in that first phase, because most teams play with a back 4. And what this means is that we'll often see Erling Haaland curve his run, try and block off one of the passing lanes to one side of the pitch, force the ball to the other side where we can then press man to man, because here the distance between the ball and that spare man is too large for the opposition to be able to access them, which means we can really squeeze then and win the ball back. And when this works, it's obviously fantastic, but it can fail quite easily, because if the opposition can find that ball out to the spare man, like we see Chelsea do here, problems start, because it then becomes apparent that the 2 midfield players are responsible for a massive space in midfield, a midfield space where the opposition will normally play 3 or even 4 players sometimes, meaning one or both of those players we have in midfield are in a 2v1 situation, which is why you need super athletic players to fill these 2 positions so they can deal with those 2v1 situations. So they have the athleticism, the pace, the power to be able to get across and close the ball down before that player can make a pass. And that is something we don't have at the moment. It's poor profiling in the press. At the weekend, Cherki and Reinders were playing these positions, neither of whom are that athletic, neither of whom are that fast, and neither of whom are that good in duels, which means obviously they can't close those players down. Every time our first line of pressure was broke and Chelsea found that free man, they would also break the second line, because neither Cherki or Reinders have the athleticism to be able to go and close the player down fast enough. And I think Semenyo would help massively here, because he has that athleticism, that strength, that ability in duels to be able to cover this large midfield area. He has that ability to be able to win the ball despite being in those 2v1 situations and at a big disadvantage. By having Semenyo there, we're covering up one of the structural issues with the press with individual brilliance, and therefore making our press much harder to play through. So now you know the real reason Manchester City want to sign Antoine Semenyo. Do you think he'll be a success for them? Let me know in the comments down below.